All right, let's dive into something intense. We're about to crack open one of the most talked about, most controversial rule books ever written. And no, it's not for a board game. This is about the unseen game of power that's being played all around us every single day. And that brings us to the fundamental question this book forces you to ask. Are you a player or are you a pawn? Think about it. Every interaction you have, whether it's at work, with your friends, even just out in public, the book's idea is that there's no sitting on the sidelines of this game. So the author, Robert Greene, lays out this pretty stark argument. He says that whether we like it or not, we are all players in this constant looping game of power. And here's the kicker. If you don't know the rules, you're not just watching from the stands, you're basically a target. You might think, oh, that sounds so old-fashioned, but the book's whole premise is that these rules are timeless. Why? Because they're not about technology or what culture you're in. They're wired into the raw, unchanging parts of human nature. You know, things like ambition, insecurity, and that deep-down drive for control. Okay, so let's get into the first big rule of this game, controlling perception. It's not just about what you are, but what people think you are. In the game of power, how you are seen isn't just important, it's pretty much everything. It's the foundation for every single move you're going to make. And the first lesson here is, honestly, it's a bit of a shock to the system. The book argues that it is way, way better to be attacked or even slandered than to just be ignored. Being ignored, that's the real killer when it comes to power. It really boils down to this simple, kind of brutal idea. What is not seen? Well, it just doesn't count. You could be the most talented person in the room, working harder than anyone else, but if you're doing it in the shadows, it means absolutely nothing. And look no further than Lola Montez for a perfect example of this. This woman was a master of crafting an image. So get this, she wasn't some mysterious Spanish flamenco dancer. Nope. She was an Irish woman who completely invented this persona. A persona so captivating that she could, accidentally fall off her horse in front of a powerful man and boom, she ends up as the mistress of the King of Bavaria. But okay, grabbing attention is just step one, right? The real trick is keeping it. And the way to do that, according to the book, is to be unpredictable. The second people think they've got you figured out, that they know your next move, they start to feel a little superior and poof, their attention is gone. The key is to never let them get too comfortable. You know who understood this perfectly? Pablo Picasso. He had this down to a science. Just when the public thought they got his style, he'd completely switch it up, creating stuff that people thought was, well, frankly, ugly or disturbing at the time. He knew that by being unpredictable, by acting on a whim, he kept the entire art world on its toes and totally captivated. All right, so rule 1 is all about perception. Now let's move on to rule 2, neutralizing your rivals. Once you've got people's attention, you've got to know how to deal with opposition. And when someone's standing in your way, let's just say the advice is decisive. And here's where we see a huge split between what we're normally told to do and the book's cold strategic logic. The common approach is to try and negotiate with troublemakers, hope they'll see the light. The power approach? Nope. It's about neutralizing their influence, isolating them. The argument is that just hoping for the best is basically a recipe for disaster. This all ties into Law 42, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. The idea is that a lot of times, when there's widespread trouble, maybe gossip in the office or dissent in a group, it's not coming from everywhere. It can usually be traced back to one single influential person. So instead of playing whack-a-mole with the problems, you have to go right to the source. So the strategy is pretty blunt. Find that one source of trouble. It could be the arrogant person on the team, the one always stirring the pot, and you act directly. You isolate them, cut them off from the group. Once you do that, their influence just withers, and the so-called sheep just scatter. But it doesn't stop there. It gets even more intense with Law 15, crush your enemy totally. This takes that whole principle and pushes it way further. It's not enough to just win one battle. You have to make absolutely sure your opponent can't get back up and come after you later. And the book uses this really powerful, kind of chilling analogy for this. It says, a partially defeated enemy is like a half-dead viper. If you leave it alone, you might think you're being merciful, but you're really just giving it time to recover. And when it does, its venom, that desire for revenge, is going to be 100 times stronger. Okay, so we've talked about controlling how people see you and dealing with your rivals. The third and final rule we're covering today turns the focus inward. It argues that the ultimate power is power over yourself. Mastering this whole game really begins with mastering your own emotions and impulses. And one of the core tactics here is to conceal your intentions. Think about it. People are always trying to figure out your angle, what you're really after. If you never show your cards, if you keep the purpose behind your actions hidden, you leave everyone guessing. And if they're guessing, they can't possibly prepare a defense against you. So who was the master of this? Francis's Sun King, Louis XIV. The guy was a genius at it. He'd sit there silently while all his ministers debated and argued. And after all that, his only reply would be this super enigmatic, "I shall see." And that was it. They'd have no idea what he was thinking until weeks later he just acted. It created this aura of intimidating unpredictability that kept everyone on edge. This feeds right into another huge idea. Plan all the way to the end. This isn't just about winning the next little skirmish. It's about having total clarity on your long-term goal. It's like playing chess. You're not just thinking about your next move, you're thinking 10 moves ahead, considering all the consequences before you even touch a piece. And for the ultimate example of this, look at Otto von Bismarck unifying Germany. It's just brilliant. After his army crushed Austria, his generals were all fired up, wanting to march on Vienna and celebrate, but Bismarck said no, absolutely not. Why? Because he knew that humiliating Austria would create a bitter enemy for generations, and he needed them on the sidelines for his real endgame, which was to provoke a war with France. That was the move that would rally all the German states to his side. See, he saw the entire board, not just the easy victory right in front of him. So, okay, we've walked through some of these pretty ruthless, highly strategic principles. After all that, what's the big takeaway? What are we supposed to do with all this? Well, the book argues that the true goal isn't necessarily to become some kind of tyrant. It's about understanding the game that's already being played all around you all the time. And it's that understanding that gives you the freedom to actually navigate the world on your own terms, with intention, instead of just being a pawn that gets moved around the board by other people. So when you boil it all down, it's really about developing these 3 core skills. First, you detach from emotion. Get out of the heat of the moment. Second, you calculate your moves. Think like a chess master. And third, you always see the whole board and keep your eyes on the end game. So we've laid out the board for you, and we've looked at some of the most fundamental rules. Now the real question is, what's your next move? The choice is yours to decide how, or maybe even if, you're going to play the game.